It's your boy Young Love, I give him that treatment. Control leg stand, Panchi America, Panji Dwell, Control leg stand, Panchi America, Panji Dwell, walk on your leg, Kankaro, what on a watching, Koga, level leg, gear, power, leg, Panda with Yay, Panchi America, Panya Dwell, Chingatonga Pandon, could you ever buy a check out? Papu Panda Jiro, what they be Dwell venting. Stand Panchi America, Panji Dwell, Panapan Pantaleg stand Panchi America, Panji Dwell, Panapan walk on your leg, Kankaro, what on a watching, Koga level leg, gear, power, leg, Panda with Yay, Panchi America, Panya Dwallamano, Chingatonga Pandon, could you ever buy a check out? Paku Panda Jiro, what they be Dwallamano.
Okay, welcome to Lagos State Media, everyone. My name is Abyei. Welcome to my co-host, Jong Makur, and our guest, Edmund Yakani. Welcome to Lagos State Media again. And for those of you who are watching in Facebook, YouTube, and Clubhouse, welcome to join us in this evening. My co-host, Jong Makur, take
over. Thank you, Abyei. To all our viewers, Lagos State Media on Facebook, Clubhouse, and on YouTube, you're all welcome to this show of this day, the 23rd of May, 2022. And in the studio with us is one of our usual guests, our friends and our brother, Mr. Edmund Yakani, the CEO of CEPO. It's live now in South Sudan, and Yakani is here to talk to us on two very important topics. And the first thing is the conference, the peace conference that took place on 16th up to 19th of May 2022 in Kampala, Uganda, between Ngok Dinka of Abyei and Misseriya of Sudan. Basically, we have heard about the peace talk, and we really need to hear from him the inside information, what transpired within those 3 to 4 days of the conference, and how this conference will be helpful to us, and especially to our people of Abyei, and to resolve the conflict between the two communities at the border angle. And the last topic that he will touch and he will brief us about on is the resolutions which were made in Mugui between cattle herders of Jonglei State and the local community of Magui County. We had it 2 weeks ago. They resolved in presence of national government security apparatus delegations, including Chief of Defense and National Security Director. They were on the ground, and they resolved some of the points the community need to operate on. So Mr. Edmund will take us through those resolutions, whether they're being implemented or not. Up to this point, our viewers, permit me to welcome our guest, Mr. Edmund Yakani. Mr. Edmund Yakani, you can take over and activate your mic.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to say thanks to you and to your viewers And I hope that this become an interactive dialogue that make us to use the concept of dialogue for building the state that we all aspire to have, what is called the Republic of South Sudan, where we minimize violence and where we don't register death of civilians because of what is described as deadly intercommunal violence or incidents that may claim the lives of our own citizens and their properties, while without any objective of if we can term it as a senseless sort of like violence that may happen among our communities. And of course, always violence are not out of blue. There must be people behind the concept that might have led to the violence. But the best we need to do is that we need to resolve that amicably for the best interest of every South Sudanese citizen, wherever they are. And also we need to embrace the concepts that the rule of law may be one of the approach that can make us peacefully coexist together. So to start with, what is described as peace talks between the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya, which was mediated or facilitated by UNISFA as a UN peacekeeping mission in Abyei, where it was hosted in Uganda, in Entebbe, under the leadership of Yoweri Museveni, to make sure that at least our fellow citizens, as we call them, Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya, resolve their differences, because we have witnessed before this particular peace conference deadly incidents between the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya tribes of Western Kordofan, and normally it's the Misseriya that attacks our fellow South Sudanese Ngok Dinka in a very deadly way. And I think that have triggered, and before I have spoke about that, I say the incidents happening against the Ngok Dinka waged by the Misseriya, I describe it as a crime against humanity, and I think that have taken a lot of shapes of people's opinion, and I think that has drawn the attention of UN Security Council through their office of the UN Secretary General Special Representative to AU, that is the former Prime Minister of Ghana, Hannah Tete, who sits now as the Special Envoy of UN Secretary General to AU, and she moved in between Juba and Khartoum for shadow diplomacy, and they reached a consensus that the Misseriya and the Ngok Dinka need to sit on a table of dialogue in Kampala as a neutral ground. So as you said, the conference have ended. It have ended on the 19th and ended by a signing of a document. They describe it as a 4-point communique, that they describe it as a peace agreement, or as whatever you can call it, as a document of consensus between the Misseriya and the Ngok Dinka for peaceful coexistence in Abyei. So the document, the language they use is, they call it 4-point. One of my general observation to the viewers of this particular platform is that the language used in this document is very soft. The language is not concrete. And also the document, somebody like me, I don't expect that type of quality. I expect more strong second diplomacy, or what you call track 2 diplomacy for peaceful coexistence. But what make me wonder is, in the presence of Hannah Tete, whom we know, she was a very instrumental in the revitalized agreement negotiation in Addis, and we have an outcome with this document. And this document tells you very clear that the dialogue between the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya was not free from the influence of Juba and Khartoum, and in particular Juba, because I've been closely watching and following the discussion in Entebbe, and I know that Sudanese embassy protest, and Sudanese embassy have sent signal to the Misseriya delegation not to go beyond anything that describe it as commitment for political and security agreement. So they don't want that to happen, simply because there's a few mindset in Western Kordofan state of Sudan who believe that they don't acknowledge or they don't recognize the Abyei protocol as enshrined in the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which was signed in 2005 between Sudan government by then and South Sudan People's Liberation Movement before the independence of South Sudan. They're those mindset, and I think they have big influence for the Misseriya to water down the content of this particular agreement. But as the role of communities calling for peaceful coexistence, I appreciate the document. It was something that at least it have sent a message or a signal that violence is not the option. How much the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya having grievances, the best way they can resolve is through dialogue and through non-violence. So from that particular angle, I appreciate it. And the document, as I said, came out with 5 points, and 5 points, they reduce it to what they describe as a 4-point communique. What are the key content or the key resolutions, which I don't think really the nature of the language of the document does not meet standard of something you can describe as a resolution, because there's no timeline, there's no task given to any particular entity to ensure this particular outcome document is implemented. So it's more of like recommendation of any workshops or recommendation of any conference. That, and even in terms of when you say recommendations of a conference, the standard of recommendations of peace conferences have never been enshrined in this document so much. So what has been enshrined is a list of wishes that people wish peaceful coexistence between the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya. And I think one thing that, before I could go to the details of the document, the Ngok Dinka have shown political will that they need to peacefully coexist with the Misseriya. But to be honest, in my following and my tracking, the Misseriya delegates are so much influenced by elements within the government of Sudan who does not want to believe on the referendum of Abyei, and some of them have huge influence, even, as I said, in Sudanese embassy in Kampala. They have played a big role to make sure that they really water down the concept of the peace conference or the peace talks. So it does not really meet the requirement as required. So that it has to be behind the mind of your audience in terms of if there's a questions later to be asked that I would like to share. So let me share the details of commitments that they have reached in this 3 days conference. One of the commitments they have reached, number one, is that the traditional leaders will advocate for intercommunal dialogue that promotes protection of civilians, protection of women, children, livestock, and property. So it's much more of the leaders of the Ngok Dinka, the traditional leaders of the Ngok Dinka and of the Misseriya will promote intercommunal dialogue. But of course, here the language is vague that nobody is entrusted to ensure that that intercommunal dialogue is conducted without interference and without undermining. This has never come very clear in the resolution. And of course, the protection of women, children, livestock, and property sounds much more stronger. But the second point that they have reached, or the second resolution, was the traditional leaders should be a tool of fostering peace, which in terms of practical interpretation, what does it mean? I don't know exactly. Whether that means the traditional leaders will make sure that they will never mobilize communities for violence. Whether that's the interpretation of the language that they have used, is that traditional leaders should be a tool for fostering peace. So being a tool for fostering peace means they should abstain themselves from fueling or championing or fostering violence among the two communities, the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya. If that's the interpretation, then that's the way how I look at the document. That may be the interpretation I'm viewing behind the language. The third point they have reached is that to support the initiative of the government level towards resolving Abyei issue. And for this particular third point, I would like to draw attention of your audience seriously. This particular point, to support the initiative of the government levels to address the issue of Abyei, this particular point comes at the third day. The third day, if you look at UNISFA Twitter handle, and this maybe the audience, I refer them back to go to that handle. If you look at the Twitter handle of UNISFA, the first commander, who is from Nigeria, called General Benjamin, tweeted prior to signing of this particular final document. He tweeted the two communities, the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya, have reached a breakthrough agreement. And he described the content agreement. He said they have called on UNISFA to continue protecting civilians, and they have reached that they will promote peace and dialogue for the protection of women, children, properties, and livestock. And also they have agreed that they will cease attacks. The word he used is not cessation, they will cease hostility. He didn't say they cease hostility. He said they will cease attacks. But if you look at the document, the final document, if you read the whole document, that particular praise of the Misseriya and the Ngok Dinka have agreed to cease attacks is absent in the document. You can't find that. So what does that mean? That means the concept of cessation of hostility was not clearly enshrined in the document. It's not mentioned in the document. And that for me is disturbing, because that's a loophole where the document is silent about ceasing attacks or hostility. And remember, in history, we have that when the Misseriya are migrating to Abyei, some of them commit atrocities and they attack. And we have seen the recent attacks. And sometimes when they're leaving also, they commit attacks or even atrocities. So the document is silent about that. But also the document is completely silent about the issue of migration rights. It's not been mentioned, because migration rights have link with attacks and hostility. Why is this particular language of cease attacks or cessation of hostility is not enshrined in the document? Simply because Sudan embassy in Kampala have strictly spoke to the Misseriya that anything to do with political and security commitment, they should not touch it. So because the language that the first commander of UNISFA, who is a Nigerian, General Benjamin, mentioned in his tweet, that the two communities have agreed to cease attacks, that completely sounds a security commitment. And that language was brushed out. And that's why it was replaced by this point 3, that the two communities have agreed that anything political and anything security-wise, it's a prerogative of Juba and Khartoum to handle it, because that is enshrined in the CPA chapter 4 with regards to Abyei protocol. And that's where now the question of whether you will have a maximum will from Juba and Khartoum to respect this particular document become questionable, or become an issue that one have to raise. The fourth point is that the communities have agreed to meet regularly. They will meet regularly in the quest for peace. So regularly, they're going to meet. And the word regularly is not described, because I look at a document whether there's a phrase that will make me realize what is regularly. Is it quarterly? Is it once in a year, twice in a year? The language of the document have never mentioned any timeline, but the phrase regularly meet is being described. The final point is that the Misseriya and the Ngok have agreed that they need a disclosure of the investigative report in relation to the violence of 2013. And as all of you are aware, in 2013, there was a really deadly violence in Abyei, and of course, it leads to the death of renowned figures. And both Misseriya and the Ngok have agreed that that report should be released officially. And of course, that report may implicate some leaders whom may be Misseriya or from the Ngok Dinka. So they've agreed that this report should be released. So that is the content of the document. The rest of the bullet points of the document is focusing and distancing the meeting in Kampala not to tackle anything to do with political and security issues of Abyei. And the document, as I said, is silent about cessation of hostility. The document is silent about migration rights of the Misseriya. How will that happen? Whether they should come through a dialogue or they should come forcefully. The document is silent about that. So, in a nutshell, this document is a list of wishes. Then, if you ask me, what are my observations in terms of the challenges are, will the elites of Misseriya who are in Western Kordofan respect this document, or in various levels of Sudan government, as we have seen the way how the embassies of Sudan have demonstrated during this discussion in Kampala. And as I'm speaking with you, prior this rollout of the talks between the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya, one of Misseriya ally who is in Western Kordofan have issued a statement. He's a general in the military, have issued a statement prior to these talks that he is proposing, for the sake of peace and stability between the Misseriya and the Ngok, is proposing the Abyei Joint Oversight Committee should be reallocated outside Abyei, should be taken to Western Kordofan. And that proposal is very controversial. And for me, I feel that that proposal actually was sending a signal that they will not really commit the Misseriyas to go for a serious dialogue. And besides that, if you look at the video of the incidents, the latest incidents, there are quite a number of Misseriya leaders who are making statements in Arabic, say they will never give in whatever the case is, that they will give in Abyei to walk away. And that's very clear, because in the discussion, one thing I'd like to bring clear in the discussion is that both Ngok Dinka and Misseriya has brought some proposals, which are actually good proposals. Proposal around formation of a joint police, proposal around formation of joint political engagement, and of course, part of it is a system of hostility. But because all those proposals have direct link with political and security commitment or defense commitment, they have been scrapped off, and some generals have refused. And even the concept of referendum is not embraced by the Misseriya, and specifically by the Sudanese. So that means once the moment you sit in the talks with regard to the status of Abyei and you don't acknowledge referendum, then that means you don't acknowledge any political processes that will define the status of Abyei in terms of territorial ownership. And that means you disputed the rulings of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, you dismiss the findings of the Boundary or Border Demarcation Commission. So that's the challenge that I would like to say is going to be there. And if you see, in terms of the political will, I don't think Juba and Khartoum have a political will to speedily work on defining the status of Abyei, because also in Juba, we have had prior the talks, our official spokesperson of the government have said the council ministers have agreed that South Sudan Defense Force will be deployed to Abyei to prevent the communal violence. And later on, prior to the signing of this agreement, our chief of staff have said, no, they have not received order to deploy our forces, South Sudan People's Defense Forces, to Abyei, which is a bit contradictory. But if you want to realize whether Juba have a will and Khartoum have a will over these peace talks of Abyei, the delegates that were there that representing two capitals were really junior. They're not senior. You don't see a very huge political presence of both countries or both capitals' political leadership strongly there. And also up to now, we have not yet seen official statements coming from both capital, being Juba or Khartoum, about acknowledging or accepting the outcome of these Entebbe peace talks. That's one thing to say. But as we're discussing with you now, you see Khartoum and Juba are negotiating oil shares at a high level. So oil is more important. And remember, Abyei is a rich area with oil. So you go and negotiating oil at a high political level. Both capital, Juba and Khartoum, have that high representation. But when it comes to the lives of the innocent civilians who sit on the oil, nobody talks about their safety and their protection. But we talk about what they sit on, the benefits. We seriously give attention to that. But keeping peace and stability among these people, don't keep attention to that. That for me shows me very clear is that this particular agreement, when I was doing my research, is almost the 6th or the 7th agreement between the Misseriya and the Ngok Dinka. And the rest were not being honored, they have been dishonored. So the question really comes is that, will this agreement be honored? My fear is that Misseriya is going to dishonor this. I don't really blame the Ngok, because my research in the previous attempts to use dialogue, that Ngok Dinka always have a commitment to see a peaceful coexistence, the provision of agreement they have reached, or any local arrangements have reached with the Misseriya. But normally the Misseriya are dishonored. Why? Because Misseriya at a pressing point when come to that particular season where they need to have a migration rights for searching for cattle grazing, in terms of green pasture for cattle, for the livestock, and then also water for the livestock. So that particular season is a pressure season for the Misseriya. So they're ready to do whatever they can do to access the land. And one of the things that they feel that they need to exercise is to show strength of power for disciplining them, Dinka Ngok, or even pushing them away from areas which they feel as a grazing areas. So my fear is that the will of the Misseriya, in comparison with the will of the Ngok Dinka in respecting this agreement, the will of the Misseriya in dishonoring this agreement is high. It's very high compared to the Ngok Dinka. And for me, this comes a question of what can UNISFA do? One of the recommendations I have spoken in several media outlets that one of the immediate things UNISFA have to do is UNISFA have to establish a tripartite approach, because UNISFA is on behalf of the UN Security Council and AU as a joint. They need to bring IGAD, and they need to have a coordinated meeting of AU, UN, and IGAD to discuss the respect of this particular agreement and how can AU and IGAD come together and respect the culture of promoting peaceful coexistence between the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya, because both army are fueling communities or are arming communities to go for confrontation. Misseriya and Dinka Ngok are concerned in terms of clashes. Both sides, the forces, are putting a support behind each community. And that requires a regional. And that is the call which was made today by the civil society when they're protesting in Abyei about the questions of their protection, and when they're challenging UNISFA to exercise its power to ensure that protection of civilians is a priority. So today, the public protest in Abyei, and where we have seen quite a number of messages from our colleagues civil society who are mainly calling for the AU, UN, and IGA to ensure that Juba and Khartoum have the will to ensure that they peacefully coexist. So I think that's what I'd like to say, and specifically some elements in Western Kordofan that are aiding, because as I said last time, when the Misseriya are coming to attack the Ngok Dinka, they are well armed with model weaponry and heavy weaponry, but they come in front of Sudan forces. Sudan forces have never intervened to protect. And besides this, Juba and Khartoum are dancing the song of we have 4 freedoms. And among the 4 freedoms is the free movement of the citizens, free trade. But now, how do you say free movement of citizens and free movement of trade if security and safety of individuals and communities are not taken serious in line of these 4 freedoms that I've reached? So that's the context I would say. My final concluding point is that brothers and sisters who are listening in this particular platform, my concern is that I've been closely tracking peacekeeping missions that are almost 80% military oriented, with less civilian and political engagement. And one of the peacekeeping missions that I've put my close eye to really check them properly in terms of their work in providing protection of civilians, it is the UNAMID in Darfur. UNAMID in Darfur is completely, almost heavily military, with less political and civilian component in terms of protection of human rights, documentation of human rights. There's a few civilians, but most of it is the investment is more on uniform, because that is linked to the concept of protection of civilians, because civilians have to be protected from armed groups. So you need to have a protection team, have to be an armed team to protect the civilian, because they may likely come to confrontation, or if civilians at risk, they may somehow show an armed strength against the opponent or the perpetrators that they feel are subjecting protection of civilians into risk. And if you look at that particular experience of UNAMID in Darfur, is that they have done similar processes of what UNISFA is doing between the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya. And my experience, my investigation is that because the culture of agreements are signed now and next tomorrow, in the next week, they have been dishonored, that have radicalized a human attitude toward what is called dialogues and agreements. So that has made the community of Darfur no longer anymore honoring concepts of agreements or dialogues or whatever you can call it, resolutions of meetings. They don't anymore. And you can see now how communities of Darfur are really killing themselves, because the culture of loss of trust and confidence in what is called peace talks, whether you call it at a local level, can be a pathway of peace and stability among the community of Darfur is already having a low and completely not trust and confidence over that. And the only way now violence, and you start building generation with that culture within the Darfur. So my fear is that based on that experience, or with that experience, I'm a bit keen about the culture of us having continuous dialogue between the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya, and always the outcomes are not being honored. I'm worried that may radicalize a generation among the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya to believe on violence as the only option, because before them, or their elders, their fathers have tried to use dialogue, and dialogue have not brought anything. So everybody said, concluding, the only way is let's go for violence. And Abyei may end up as Kashmir between Pakistan and India. So we don't want Abyei to end up as another Kashmir between Juba and Khartoum. So one of the things that I'm been advocating for is that as South Sudanese, we may need to call on the UN Security Council to review the mandate of MONUSFA and provide MONUSFA a civilian component, that some other civilian component will support and will have certain energy, both human resource and financial, to foster implementation of such recommendations, to at least build sense that dialogue can yield results. Dialogue is not something that always is being used for covering a wound, because if such conferences are becoming a strategy of covering a wound from time to time, that wound, one day this strategy of the coverage will become meaningless and nobody will respect it, nobody will honor it, and become a problem like what we have seen now going on among the communities of Darfur, which I think we don't want that to happen between the Misseriya and the Ngok Dinka. And that's the call that I like to really bring in. And of course, my conclusion is that I'm a bit worried about the Misseriya elites respecting the outcome of this particular Entebbe, what we call as peace talks or peace conference. Of course, at UN level, it's highly appreciated, it's highly welcome, and it's actually described as a breakthrough. We hope that this breakthrough will be honored, not to be dishonored tomorrow. And both Juba and Khartoum, once they don't have the will to honor this, then this is just a mere, what we describe in Arabic, Hibr al-Warak. It's just an ink on a paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Edmund Yakani, for your briefing and elaborations on the peace which was conducted in Kampala, Uganda, between Ngok Dinka and Misseriya. Considering the document, Mr. Edmund, initially, the UNISFA mandate was to end on 15th of May 2022, which was supposed to be this month, last week, probably. But the UNISFA came up with this initiative of conducting and facilitating the peace talk between the two communities at the border of Abyei. At our first interview, we were trying to look at how commitment of both two governments into this peace dialogue or peace conference, Khartoum regime and Juba government. We came to realize that both two governments were not that committed to this peace talk. And by looking at the quality of the documents, you have put it clearly that this document is a document of low quality. Any South Sudanese or any activist like you could not expect this document to come out of that conference or that peace talk, considering numerous agreements or peace talk which were conducted between Misseriya and Abyei, and even between government of Sudan and the government of South Sudan. As an activist and somebody who has been following up this peace talk very keenly and closely, do you think these documents or this agreement will undermine the Abyei Protocol, Chapter 4, 2005 CPA? Or do you think will it honor Abyei Protocol, which is Chapter 4, and other numerous agreements or documents which were drafted in regard to the Abyei issue? Before you answer that question, you need also to answer this question alongside with it. Were there some government representatives from Sudan and from South Sudan? And if they were there, then what was their contribution toward this peace conference documents? You can activate your mic.
Okay, thank you very much. I think one, let me start with the last part of your question. Both government doesn't have a strong representation during the dialogue because they see the dialogue as a track two. It's mainly between the traditional leaders of Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya, and also that's a technical mistake from UNISFA, not extending official, and we hope that Hannah Tete would have extended a very influential person who can be representing the leadership of Juba and the leader of Khartoum. There, of course, in the signing ceremony, the political leadership of both capital surface, but of a low profile. And of course, for them, what they do is that they keep on appreciating, thank you for reaching an agreement. And of course, none of them have made a strong, concrete statement where they want to refer or they want to issue statements that can easily qualify as a commitment to respect the political processes for defining the status of Abyei. Both capitals are avoiding that, or leaders from both capitals that are present during the dialogue are avoiding that. Of course, as I said, from my following, Sudan Embassy was so active in Kampala in following up the discussion because they don't, as I said in the beginning, they don't see any commitment that the Misseriya will reach with regard to security and and political commitment in this document. They don't want to see really that one coming up, and don't keep that to be at the level of the two governments in terms of the argument. But I think one thing I'd like to say is that this particular strategy, and this one specifically, I'm drawing attention over the leadership in Juba, because the leadership in Juba seems to be also having the same length of Khartoum, where Abyei is being seen from the angle of resources. While actually the oil in Abyei, to be honest with you, does not contribute so much in terms of the benefit. But of course, there's a possibility of more oil exploration in Abyei. So defining Abyei, it has linked with the oil, which I think is a central point of both Juba and Kampala, in terms of Juba and Khartoum, in terms of their landscape or their way of reading what is described as Abyei. They look at Abyei from the source point of view. That's why Abyei becomes sensitive case for them. But at the moment of peaceful coexistence among the communities, both capitals does not see that as a serious issue of their interest. Their interest is really the oil. But all these continuous series of dialogues is building a language of undermining the protocol. Actually, when you're asking this question to this morning, I tried to look into all the other six. I just look at all other six documents, whether those documents have language that undermines the protocol of Abyei or undermines any of the processes that have linked with the defining the status of Abyei, and specifically the outcome of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and then the Boundary Commission's outcome. And also there's a proposal which was made by the former president of South Africa, His Excellency Thabo Mbeki, when he was heading what is called the AU high-level panel. Okay, he proposed the eligibility of the voter that will decide on the status of Abyei, and his language he used was the Ngok Dinka who are permanent residency of Abyei. So he didn't give to every Ngok Dinka, but it may specifically refer to that Ngok Dinka who he described as a permanent residency. And all these languages, there's elements in Sudan who doesn't want. So all these particular processes, and which I think also I'd like to appreciate our colleagues from Ngok Dinka in terms of also being sensitive to the language in the document. I like also the sensitivity because they have not allowed any language that will go to any of the documents which were signed that undermines the concept of the outcome of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, the Boundary Commission findings, and then Abyei protocol in the CPA in Chapter 4. So all these processes are somehow technically heading towards undermining the protocol of Abyei. And that's why I'm keen that also we need to keep on engaging with our Ngok Dinka that will be allowed. I'm aware that we have sons and daughters of Abyei who are intellectual educated, who are from legal background, who have the capacity and the capability of making sure no mess of language that undermines the protocol of Abyei. But there's a trial, there's attempts from Khartoum several times to undermine the Abyei protocol. And one of the things that they need to undermine in the Abyei protocol, they say, oh, there is I've interacted with a few of them. I reach out to a few of them when the Kampala process is going on. In Southern Kordofan, some of them are in Khartoum, I reach out to them. What they will say is that, oh, the protocol is okay, but the concept of the referendum for the state of Abyei is what they don't want. Because the concept of the referendum is only linked with the Ngok Dinka. It has nothing to do with the Misseriya. And they feel that Misseriya were not enough consulted on the protocol. Yes, of course, it may hold water, the argument that they're not consulted. But clear is that when we talk of Abyei, we talk of that land that is occupied by the Ngok Dinka. And previously I've mentioned that there's even a compromise from the Boundary Commission in carving out some land of South Sudan because they couldn't really link it to Ngok Hijilich, which we call it Pantao, which was carved out of that description or mapping of what described Abyei. Simply, this is a compromise really from the Boundary Commission as a balance or a way of somehow sending signal. We are not giving it 100%. We'll give you a portion of what you want. So all these attempts were to generate a language that will undermine the Abyei protocol. And that's why maybe, as I said, the document is a bit soft and vague. Maybe it's also for our best interest not to have a document that have a language that may undermine the protocols of Abyei. But there's attempts to undermine the concept of referendum. But of course, for me, the challenge I have is that the weakness of Juba is that the leadership in Juba does not look deeply into territorial ownership of Abyei. They normally downplay it to be a Ngok Dinka and a Misseriya game, which for me, it's really disturbing. We need to see that the leadership in Juba takes it as a national issue. The national parliament should take it as a national issue. Today, I've been interacting with some parliamentarians, national parliamentarians, say, can our national parliament call the traditional leaders of Abyei who went to Entebbe to brief the whole parliament? And when I was referring to parliament, I refer to the national legislature, the sitting of both the parliament, the upper house, and the lower house. Can they listen to the traditional leaders of Abyei? One of them answered me like, why? What's Abyei? That's the mentality we have in some political elites in Juba, is that they see the case of Abyei as a Ngok Dinka case, as a minor case, and even some of them are saying, they are more confused actually. They don't confusing us, which that would have not taken them serious. But that's a territorial land that you need to own it. That's your border, that's your people. So why do you want to see them as like their burden? They're not a burden. It's a national issue. It's a complete national priority. And that's, for me, comes to the mindset in Juba that we have, is that we need to really take Abyei as a national priority, and we need to stand with whatever cost it takes for us to protect the land of Abyei, because we have completely legal instruments that empower us to speak, not as a Ngok Dinka, that empower us to speak as South Sudanese claiming our territorial entity. But of course, these have linked with the leadership in Juba. And specifically, one thing that is disturbing me, when it's having also leadership in Juba with huge influence of the allies of Khartoum during the time of the struggle, they may water down because they still have friends who may undermine the leadership in Juba not to be strong on that. They may say, you remain, keep it low, don't take it serious, we will manage this, we can call them, let's calm down, let's look at that. That's another problem. So infiltration of allies of Khartoum who are abandoned in the system, who are with us in our system of South Sudan, watering down the idea of us standing up as South Sudanese to claim Abyei as our territory land, not only a Ngok Dinka, because I'm somebody who's a bit disturbed when I see some people see it as it's only a Ngok Dinka issue, not a national issue. And of course, these have linked with political commitment that we have in Juba. And specifically, when the political commitment in Juba is challenged with numerous political challenges, you have implementation of the revitalized agreement as a headache, you have headache of generating revenue to meet the priority of delivering services, and you have still also headache where some of the elites are fueling violence among the communities by either aiding them with the military strength. All those is disturbing Juba and has made Juba to see Abyei not as a priority. They come to realize Abyei is a priority when we have lost it. And that's, for me, the challenge that I like to raise it. So the content of the document, for me, I'm keen on tracking them. And actually, one of the things that I try to look into is I try to look at all several documents. But I realize in those documents, there are attempts to undermine the concept of referendum for Abyei. Honestly, if Misseriya are to hear that South Sudanese have decided, or Ngok Dinka have decided, no referendum for Abyei remain like that, they will celebrate it. Because for them, the last scenario is keep Abyei as a Kashmir between India and Pakistan. And we don't want to go for that. That's not the option we need to go for it. That's a worst case scenario for us South Sudanese if we have a political will and a political commitment from the leadership based in Juba. Thank you over there.
Thank you, Mr. Edmund Yakani. Literally, that is how many South Sudanese, especially the activists and intellectuals, are viewing these documents. And the interests of Sudan government, you put it clearly, they always put deep under the papers, the protocol, Abyei Protocol, Chapter 4, CPA, because they don't need things to do with referendum to determine the fate of Abyei territory and its people. Mr. Edmund, you will agree with some of us that the relationship between Sudan and South Sudan is deteriorating at the recent past. On the courtesy of social media, we have seen today actually how South Sudanese nationalists, especially women, being treated in Khartoum. And others are saying what prompted Sudan authorities to treat our people like that is simply because of what transpired in Awil, in the case of a little girl which was raped to death, the later book. And national government is so silent about it. The dispute between Misseriya and Abyei, Ngok Dinka, is not up to date. There is numerous attacks almost every week, and Juba government is silent about it. Khartoum government is silent about it. And when you look at the two national government at the top, it seems like their relationship is so close. But at the west, down to their feet, the relationship is getting rotten like almost every day. What can you say about that? As activists and as a CEO of CEPO, because we really need our government to take things serious instead of having a relationship between President Kiir and the military leadership in Khartoum and Tutkeo. And what about the citizens in connection with these documents?
To be honest and sincere with you, that the political leadership in Juba and Khartoum are facing similar challenges. The challenges around good governance, the challenge around respect and honor of human rights, the challenge around service delivery to the citizens. And what made them to share common interests is that their source of revenue, both of them are depending on the oil, and the oil is mainly at the border. So the oil connects them, and the oil connects the top leadership. But the revenue of the oil does not connect the citizens in terms of service delivery. Both are losing, whether the citizens in South Sudan or the citizens in Sudan are losing that. And this has brought the idea that we become more submissive to the top political leadership game of Sudanese, and we tend to subject our citizens to that harsh situation we're in. Because this incident that happened in Abyei, yes, our government have condemned, our government have called for a serious legal process to be undertaken, and specifically an official spokesperson of the government, Michael McQuay, have talked about that. And I saw a pressure coming from Abyei community in diaspora in demanding for justice, and even the youth, the women on the ground demanding for justice. And Sudanese traders have to come forward and acknowledge it as a crime, and also they demanded for justice and they contributed. But of course, one of the biggest things that we still have it as a hangover, it's a question of identity between Juba and Khartoum. And this question of identity, it's really a big issue. It has 3 or 2 dimensions. Maybe I don't even say 3, it's mainly 2 dimensions. The concept of, are we Africans or are we Arabs? Our fellow Sudanese still treat themselves as Arabs, and we're seen as Africans. They see themselves as an Islamic state, and we see ourselves as a Christian state. So those 2 components of identity, it have a huge impact on our humanity. So whatever mistake they do for us, we see them as Arabs, we see them as Islamic society. Whatever we do, they see us as Christians, they see us as an African identity. So that's the clash. And that requires political maturity, that leadership have to be serious. As you said, is that our leadership in Juba need to be serious, is that always we come to see statements when disaster has reached the peak. When disaster is starting, we're quiet. Or until when a pressure is generated that why are you silent? And our own citizens are facing that. Because if we have the concept that a pain of a single South Sudanese is a pain of all South Sudanese, that would have helped us. But sometimes we feel that the pain of a single South Sudanese is still not a national pain. We see like where Fitisu is the one who looked for it. It's an isolated case. A case of a national, we can't describe it as an isolated case. It is a national issue that requires, and that's why a death of a single South Sudanese in the hands of anybody who's not a South Sudanese should be a national issue. So as you said, the treatment of our citizens is really disturbing. I've been watching, actually, even some of them have been calling. I know where fellow South Sudanese activists who are in Khartoum are calling me, this is the way we're facing. And specifically, immediately after the incident of Abyei, they've been reaching out to me, calling me and briefing me on what's going on. And here I went actually to Sudan Embassy, and good enough that some people in Sudan Embassy, I know them, and I talk to them like, why is this happening? And they tell me like, look here, we have no any credible information on your claims. Give us time, look into it. And also I try to pursue some people in the Foreign Ministry of Foreign Affairs that, look here, you need to have a say. Our embassy will have a say in Khartoum. If the embassy is having a say, you need to have a say here, or you summon the Sudanese ambassador. So at least we have a clear message of what's going on to our citizens. But of course, the mutual benefit is the top leadership benefits, and simply top leadership benefit because they share equal burden. So each one have to protect, have to pay a backkeep of the other, because we are the one at the leadership level who brought what we call Juba Agreement, peace agreement for Sudan. And remember, the revitalized agreement, we ended up where? We ended up in Khartoum. So that's a common interest. Everybody has to show that, you mess up with me, I'll mess up with you. You keep me, I keep with you. And remember, recently there's a political development that is becoming harsh, where we have communists, where it comes from media that they have been detained in Juba. Later on, His Excellency President asked for their release, and they reached Khartoum. They were arrested, and today we're seeing in social media that the Communist Sudanese Party have signed an agreement with Abyei, who is not a signatory to the Juba Peace Agreement, and this is going on, and even official media outlets has been published. So that tells you that even if the two leadership are working together, still behind the curtains, they are looking into the opponents of weakening the one another, which for me does not give them chance to look at the best interests of their citizens. And that's why this particular agreement is a practical case study. They have no political representation to demonstrate that the peaceful coexistence between the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya is a national priority, neither for Juba, neither for Khartoum. Any of them have never shown that the discussion in Kampala between the Dinka Ngok and the Misseriya is a national interest. The only thing Khartoum have shown is to threaten the Misseriya not to go to a more commitment that undermines their strength of using Abyei protocol as a stake of pulling back Juba with regard to things to do with oil. And that's what I'm a bit shocked. 3 days peace talks in Kampala, no political representation. But you look into big offices, discussion about oil cooperation at high level. But these are the citizens who sit on the oil. These are the citizens who are supposed to benefit from the oil. You discuss oil that's supposed to deliver for them services, improve their lifestyle. You don't care about the safety and security of them, but you care about the oil that they sit on it. So that's, for me, send a very bad message that both Juba and Khartoum have no huge interest. But for me, coming back to our own country, to our own nation, the political attitudes in Juba towards Abyei need to be changed. What's the change? They need to take Abyei as a national, as a serious issue. They shouldn't see Abyei is only a Ngok Dinka issue. And there's some sentiments. I'm quoting in South Sudanese that say Abyei people are confused. But if they're confused, the territory, the land is not confused. It's up to us to go to dialogue with them and get control of the territorial land of Abyei and pick later on, because we have lost a lot. And we're busy fighting among ourselves. We're losing it to Uganda. Recently, there's a complaint about the border of South Sudan and Uganda in a place called Bori, which is a Kajukeji land. Nyumbe is taking it over. Kenya is taking over somewhere. So until when should we lose the land? So that would have been a case study. So for me, my answer is that there's a request and there's a call for political attitude change in Juba to take Abyei as a national issue, as a national priority, and we handle it. And by the way, I always have disturbance. When it comes to Abyei issue, people like to point fingers only the Dinka Ngok are the one talk about it. No. Any South Sudanese political leader should take a responsibility of speaking about Abyei. Abyei is a national land. It's not a Dinka Ngok land. Yes, we know the inhabitants are South Sudanese, they're called Dinka Ngok, but the fight for the territorial control of Abyei is not a Ngok priority. It should be a national priority. A South Sudanese who sit at the far end of Tombra should have the right to speak about the territorial control of Abyei. So, and this culture is really so much in our political elites that whenever I hear Abyei, they say, why is the Ngok Dinka? Why not talking? Why are they quiet? But this is a national issue. This is not a Dinka Ngok issue. If they can speak on other parts of South Sudan for safety and security, why are we only keeping them? That safety and security is their own problem, while they can speak over other issues of other parts of the country. So we're so discriminative to them. So we need to stop that. That political attitude we need to change. That's my response to your question.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Edmund. Before I pose my last questions in regard to the peace talk between Ngok Dinka and Misseriya, I've seen one of our viewers, Ruai, pose the questions that what do you think government can do while Ngok Dinka intellectuals, yes, what do you think the government will do while a lot of Dinka Ngok intellectuals are residing in Khartoum? Thank you, Roy Agog Deng, for that questions. And to all our viewers, you are all encouraged to pose your questions. Abraham Adit is there to take care of your questions and to display them on our screen, so that our guests will be in a position to shed light based on the questions that you might have in your mind. So basically, Yakani, before you answer that questions, I really need to let you know, my brother, our government, especially Minister of Foreign Affairs, and even the top, the big six, that is presidency. These people are always quick to respond to the monetary terms. If anything regarding money, in Arab world, that there is money that need to be loaned to South Sudan, you will see them very active and proactive. But when it comes to the territory, defending the territorial area of South Sudan, they always go muted, and sometimes they even pretend not to be aware of what is happening. Some government officials, even now, if you ask them one by one, they will tell you that they are not aware of what is happening in Abyei. And some will tell you the only incident that they are aware of is the incident between Twitch of Warap and Abyei Dinka Ngok. That is one thing they will tell you that they are aware of. But Misseriya incident, they will pretend like they have no clue about it. And that is the bad thing of all. So you can go on to answer that questions of our viewer, Roy Agog Deng.
You know, one of the mistakes that as South Sudanese we should not do, we should not describe Abyei by its inhabitants to be a South Sudan land. We should avoid that. The intellectuals of Ngok Dinka who are residing in Khartoum or working in under Khartoum government institutions, because I'm aware some of them are working there, they're very good jobs. They're studying in Khartoum, some of them are having a wealthy life. That shouldn't be an excuse for us to remain silent about the territorial ownership of Abyei. That for me shouldn't be there. And I think that's where the mindset that we need our government to change. Our government should not describe Abyei by the presence of the Ngok Dinka sons and daughters wherever they are. Even if they're outside Abyei, all of them, still as a government, as a nation, we have legitimacy to claim the territorial control of Abyei. Of course, as individuals, they have their rights that we can't interfere with. They have the right of adequate standard of living. If they opt that that's their adequate standard of living, let them continue, but that shouldn't be an excuse for us to define Abyei as a South Sudan territory, that we need to own it, because the territorial ownership have nothing. And by the way, they may shift their nationality. This is also we should take into account. They may shift their nationality from being a Ngok Dinka and they want to be Sudanese. We have no any legal right to deny them that. They can opt to be Sudanese while they're Ngok Dinka, but that does not mean that because they are Ngok Dinka and they are Sudanese by nationality, then we define Abyei as Sudanese land. That's wrong. That's a mistake that we should not entertain it. So for me, and that's why the call I would like to make to the political attitude in Juba, that they should change the attitudes. We should not look at Abyei from an angle of the presence of Ngok Dinka. And that's why I like the proposal made by Thabo Mbeki, that once it comes to the right of vote for determining the status of Abyei, it is the Ngok Dinka who are permanent residents. That's the reason, that's the logic behind the concept of permanent residency. Ngok Dinka can be anywhere. Some of them might have changed their nationality, but they're not permanent residents of Abyei. So they may not have the legitimacy or the eligibility to vote for the referendum. That's, we need to take it serious, that concept. And that's why for me, I like to stand up and say, my position is that Abyei is a South Sudanese land. We have a national obligation to stand up and campaign and work strong for the territorial ownership of Abyei, regardless of where Ngok Dinka are, what nationality they're owning, or wherever they're enjoying their lives. That for me is not an excuse. I see them as South Sudanese who have decided to exercise their individual rights. That because as individuals, they have their rights to decide whom they want to be, where they want to be. But the collective rights have linked with the land that we call it as Abyei. That land called Abyei is a collective rights. No single Ngok Dinka who sits anywhere can decide to give it out that this is Sudanese land. And that's why some of the Sudanese, when I was talking to them, they say, hey, there's a quite number of Ngok Dinka who are even against the referendum. And even I have journalists, international journalists, who have reached out to me and said, Edmund, you know, we have seen you campaigning on Abyei. Why are there a number of Ngok Dinka who we have talked to? They are not embracing the concept of the referendum. And even some journalists have went further saying the experience of South Sudan referendum have informed so many Ngok Dinkas that they will never make a mistake to decide to referendum this of Abyei. I say no. This is completely a weak and naive, and it's a very more of an influenced position. My aim for Abyei is not the Ngok Dinka. My aim for Abyei is a territorial land. That's what I say.
Thank you, Brother Edmund. Literally, our government need to protect the sovereignty of the country and protect the territory, despite the inhabitants of those areas. And if the government is giving such land and place it under the hand of the inhabitants or locals, then believe me, my brother, South Sudan will be divided among the neighboring states. The same thing that is happening in Abyei now will soon happen at the border between Uganda and South Sudan, and even Kenya and South Sudan. And it has already happened between Ethiopia and South Sudan. If you look at the part of the other side of Murle land, it's being encroached by this Ethiopian. And simply because our government is so much into external affairs more than looking at the bigger picture of their land. The last questions before I give it back to Abraham Adit, if he has any question to ask in regard to the peace talk of Ngok Dinka and Misseriya, is how do you think the government, both two governments, will adopt these resolutions of Kampala peace talk, especially the government of South Sudan and the government of Sudan, to incorporate these documents into other previous documents which were signed in regard to the Abyei and Misseriya incidents or issues?
Thank you very much. Based on the representation during the dialogue, where, as I said, the representation is very low politically, that clearly tells you the will to adapt this document seriously as a legal binding document by both capitals, Juba and Khartoum, I think is very low. I'm not quite sure that they are going to do that seriously. And also, as I said, I've already tested in South Sudan when I've talked to some MPs to raise a motion of asking the leadership of the national legislature to allow the traditional leaders of Ngok Dinka to come and brief them on the processes of the Kampala peace talks. And as I said, there's no positive response to me. That tells you very clear the chances of both government, Juba and Khartoum, adopting these resolutions as a binding document is very low. I have to be honest with you, is very low, and I don't think that really is going to be something quick. Even if, since they didn't show a recognition of acknowledging the processes, that tells you very clear the will to adopt them formally. It's very low, and I don't predict that this is going to be sooner. And my worry is that this document might end up as a PR of UNISFA and may die natural.
Yeah, thank you so much for that perspective. Literally, that is what will happen, because the idea of peace talk was initiated and the two governments were not into it until even our resolutions are out, and they will not still adopt the resolution. In regard to our parliamentarians, some of the things should be championed by the parliamentarians. They want to inform the executive that this is what is happening and it needs the attentions of our government. And unfortunately, Yakani, as you are aware of, we have parliaments which is being constituted by different parties. Literally 550 MPs are not representing the people. in that country, but they're representing their bosses, the parties who gave them delegates or gave them tickets to represent them in the parliament. That is why you see some of them asking you such questions that what is Abyei? Some of Abyei sons are confused. How surely can a lawmaker give such response if indeed they are in that parliament to represent the people of that country? So literally that response tells you a lot about our parliament. Our parliament is not yet parliaments until we have elected parliaments. That is where we will have a full right to call them and also seek their attention. So I will turn it back to my co-host, Abraham Adit. Before we come back quickly to the issue of eastern part of the country that is happening between Eastern Equatoria and the Jonglei cattle herders. Abraham Adit, if you have any questions, you can activate your mic and you pose it to our guest.
Thank you, Brother Ngok and Edmund. Anyway, before I ask my question, let me give this chat to one of the our listener in the clubhouse. Abraham, if you can hear me, you can activate your mic and then ask your question.
Sure, I can hear you clearly. It's going to be me if you can hear me clearly.
Yeah,
so just let me know when I'm not clear. First of all, let me welcome Brother Yakani.
I don't hear him.
I guess you might have issues with the network.
Hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Hello?
Hello, yes.
Yeah. Well, usually when two parties enter into agreement, especially political agreement, like this of Abyei now and Misseriya, it's for two reasons. Number one, they will enter the agreement with intention of gaining a mutual relationship among each other. Each one of them will walk away with their interests within the agreement. And that's why they call it compromise. You may not gain an agreement, all of it together, but you will walk away with most of your interests in the agreement. That's number one. Number two, one party has to have an upper hand over the other one. Now, I'm not really familiar with the situation of the struggle between Misseriya and Abyei, but the little information I have, it looks like Misseriya is the one with the upper hand over the agreement. Why? Because they are the one all the time who started attacking Dinka Ngok areas all the time. Now, as you were talking, I observed that Misseriya does not have any intention, or based on what you said, Misseriya is not really committed, or it will never be committed to the term of the agreement, which makes sense to me. Okay, which makes sense to me. So, and it bring up a question of who actually initiated the idea of peace agreement among them. Who did that? Is it Misseriya? Is it not Ngok? Because if it's Misseriya is the one who initiated with the upper hand over the situation, then it will be a big chance this agreement will work and it will be legitimate. But if they were pushed by external power to have this agreement, to sign this agreement, it's going to be a sloppy agreement. It's not going to work, and we can tell, Mr. Yakani, from your voice, from your observations, it's not going to work. It has to be a mutual agreement that the party with upper hand initiate the agreement, call for the agreement, let's call for coexisting. Or Abyei or the person or the party who called for the agreement has to have an upper hand of the other one, the other party. You see? So the question is, who actually initiated the peace talk? Is it Misseriya or Dinka Ngok or external party, a third party from outside? That's number one. Number two, even the nature of agreement, the way I see it looks like it's a yes, we consider Misseriya, they're from a different country, but it looks like it's a regional issue, a neighbor's issue. If it's a neighbor's issue, it looks like the only one person can play a big role in enforcing this agreement, or at least influencing two parties to take this agreement seriously. Is the two local governments from Misseriya area and from Abyei area.
Mm-hmm.
So now, if we ever have to think the government will involve, don't you think it should be a state, a local government of the Abyei region and Misseriya region? Are the two parties supposed to initiate the idea of talk? So these two things I was hoping, to get answers to them. Because you cannot enter an agreement and you feel before even the talk finished, it's not going to work. Then there is something missing here. So what is it? Can you complete this sentence? Can you complete the Dutch, Mr. Yakani?
Okay, thank you, Abraham. Yeah, Mr. Yakani, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think in the first comments he made, comments that I share with him, the way how he described what peace agreement is and how peace agreement need to be handled and how its process look like. I agree with him on that particular description. And I come from a background where I've been engaging in the revitalized peace agreement. The power play is very important for any parties that go to agreement. Without a proper power play analysis, whatever agreement you signed, it will not work. So in terms of the power play, his description is correct that Misseriya always feel they're more powerful in waging attacks against the Ngok Dinka, and always when attacks are waged and then people negotiate, that there's a need to have a dialogue. And that means the dialogue is in favor of Misseriya, and that's why they have the chance to water it down. That's what I'm saying. But in terms of his question, local administration, in Entebbe, when they were discussing the peace talks, there was an attempt to establish a local administrative structures, which were not embraced by both Juba and Kampala. What are they? There was a call for joint police to be established. So the joint police maintain mutual benefit. You have a joint police between the Misseriya and the Dinka Ngok, and that joint police act as a symbol of being born together, working together, being collective. That particular approach was denied as a local government approach, was denied specifically by Khartoum. And there's a call for joint political administration. Also, that is completely denied. And this is a result of, as I said, prior to the peace talks, political elites of Misseriya in Western Kordofan have called for reallocation of the joint Abyei Oversight Committee to be moved away from Abyei to Western Kordofan. That tells you that actually Misseriya feel they're powerful. So the element of local government institutions that will embrace, even if you look at the agreement is really much more anchored on a function of a local government by saying the traditional leaders should be tool of peaceful coexistence. There should be continuous intercommunal dialogues. And there's a need for both the Misseriya and the Ngok Dinka to have a regular meetings that foster peace. That's completely a local government. But the question is the local government, whether being from the angle of the Misseriya and the Ngok Dinka, independent of the influence of Khartoum and Juba? The answer is no. Juba and Khartoum have influence on how the local system operates on the ground because there's appointments. And even some of those appointments complicate the what we call the consolidated power within the Ngok Dinka, if I speak from South Sudan angle, the way how you put administration Abyei sometimes is destabilized the unity of the Ngok Dinka. And that's some of the things that we need to learn out of it. So my answer to him is that right now, as I'm speaking with you, Misseriya at the upper hand because they waged attacks, but also they can undermine the agreement. And part of them is that they don't see a proper functional local administration that does not give them the privilege of deciding as a powerful player in the situation to win their own interest. And that's why the concept of joint political administration was scrapped off by Khartoum. They don't like it. And I think also Juba have never expressed interest of showing pressure that they need to it. So who initiate these talks? These talks neither initiated by the Misseriya, neither initiated by the Ngok, is an external. Who is the external player? It is the office of the special representative of UN Secretary General who sits at AU, who is like UN Secretary General Special Representative to AU, who is an African, who is a former Prime Minister of Ghana, Hannah Tete. She is the one who initiated this idea of the talk. So it's an external because she have a shadow diplomacy of meeting Khartoum and meeting Juba, and then later on she initiated this concept of the peace talks as a way of consolidating peace in Abyei. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Yakani. Yeah, go ahead.
Very good, Mr. Yakani. So now, in that case, so we established that the agreement was initiated by a third party. Let's put it that way. If that's the case, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
So in that case, we should not be so optimistic about this peace agreement. So it has to be between two parties with the same capacity and pressure to the agreement in order for both of them to have a willingness to actually benefit from this agreement. So if it's the third party is calling it, it's not going to work. So maybe Abyei need to go back and just you know and establish itself. It has to give a pressure to the opponent in order for both of them to come to a table of discussion. Now, let me just give you a background of the other agreement we signed once. Beginning of this year and the end of the last year, there were a few agreements were signed, and some of them were signed by a local government of the Misseriya area with our government. I don't know if you can recall that. And some were signed by chiefs of the Misseriya and the South and Abyei. I can trust the one that signed between the two chiefs because they are the one who have the issue. Now, if the third party is coming in and is forcing the agreement, it's not going to work unless these two parties, these two chiefs, take the initiative and call for that peace agreement. Now, another thing caught my attention. The agreement is done in a neighboring country. So it gives me an impression that it's a government initiative, whether from South Sudan side or from Khartoum side. Because if it's just agreement, it's just a peace agreement between two rivaling two communities within the region, it should not go outside the country. So that's what I think. Maybe there's some information there missing, or maybe I did not listen very well because I was kind of occupied. So you explain that point to me. Why is it agreement between two regional tribes can be taken outside the country for a dialogue? Why can it be done within the region and with the chiefs of two rivaling communities? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, yes.
I think it's simply the influence of the two capitals. Juba described any host of such meeting in Sudan territory is not neutral, and Khartoum also describe and host of such meeting in Juba is not neutral, or in South Sudan is not neutral. So both capitals does not have the will to really commit themselves to resolve the tension between the two communities, and that's why they have to allow it. A third party have to decide where the venue should be. Actually, if you have a political will from both capitals, they could have hosted this meeting within Abyei, even not outside Abyei, in a territory that within Abyei, and that would become a neutral territory when both of them were able to provide safety and protection, because it's a mutual benefit if they have a stable Abyei than a destabilized Abyei. But because that will is not there, a third party have to decide for them the venue. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, to follow up, actually for this question, to follow up, like the UN are the one who called this peace between Dinka Ngok and Misseriya. And they know very well that the issues between Misseriya and Dinka Ngok cannot be solved by Misseriya and Dinka Ngok. These issues will be solved by two governments, Juba government and Khartoum government. So my question to you, Mr. Yakani, why the UN didn't call the two governments first? Have a meeting, have a conference, a meeting, this serious meeting, because what held Abyei back is between these two governments. Why the UN didn't call the two governments first to have a conference before the Misseriya and the Ngok? Why they didn't do that?
One of the things that I think UN have believed that is a strong basis of why they have to use a track 2 between the two communities, the Ngok Dinka and the Misseriya, it is the shuttle diplomacy done by the UN Special Representative for the Secretary General, who is based at AU, Hannah Tete, because she went to Khartoum, met with the top leadership of the Khartoum on behalf of the UN Secretary General, which at the same time is on behalf of the UN Security Council. She came to Juba, she met with the top leadership, and they reached consensus. So UN believes that that is the what we call the track 1 diplomacy that they have used, where it is more of a formal, engaging the formal institutions to get their consent for a track 2 approach to be used, because meeting of traditional leaders is a track 2 diplomacy that they have to gain the consent of the two capitals, and the two capitals have gained for them. I think for me, still, they have an opportunity. If UN is serious, they have opportunity, since they have used that approach in gaining the consent, and they were able to reach to consensus having a track 1 traditional leaders meeting happening. There's a need for them to go back to their drawing board and call for a meeting of track 1, asking Juba to have delegation, ask Khartoum to have a delegation, and have a meeting of these delegations to endorse the outcome of these Kampala peace talks agreement or Kampala conference outcome. And I think for me, that particularly need now the involvement of the UN Secretary General. And I think if the UN Secretary General is want to involve, he shouldn't keep it as a UN complete process. He should do a tripartite process where he bring on board UN, AU, and also he bring on board what they call IGAD. So need to have a joint IGAD, AU, and UN to call Juba delegates and Khartoum delegates to meet and to make sure that they reach a consensus, mutual benefit on how to keep peace and stability in Abyei. That's really my answer. But otherwise, why the answer to your question is that they believe the shuttle diplomacy done by Hannah Tete as a UN Secretary General Special Representative to AU by visiting the leadership in Khartoum and having talks with them and secure their consent, and by coming to Juba with the top leaders of the country and secure their consent, they believe they have done what is required from them as a UN, as a third party, to secure a consent of both capital, or what you would describe as a blessings of both Juba and Khartoum, that go and host a track 2 meeting among the traditional leaders. But I think still, for me, they still have opportunity. These particular discussions can't hold water until the top leadership of the country is called. And I think my call in this particular platform is that still Hannah Tete need to reach out to the Secretary General, and Secretary General must call for a meeting where he call the AU presence and IGAD presence and bring delegates of Juba and Khartoum and tell them exactly what do they wish to see as a commitment of the two capitals for peace and stability in Abyei.
Thank you. Yeah, my last question will be, and then I will joke. You know, you mentioned a very good point that the Abyei issues can be treated as national issues, not local issues. And you mentioned too in your speech before that people of South Sudan, when you talk about the Abyei issue, they will say, "Oh, don't talk about Abyei, those Abyei issues. They're treated as a local issues." You know, why our people? So is it why our South Sudanese, especially I'm talking about South Sudanese, we South Sudanese, why can we talk and campaign so hard about the Abyei issues? Why we neglect people of Abyei? People of Abyei right now, we see them that victim for the two countries. They don't have a side. When they run to the northern side, they will reject it. When they run to the southern side, they don't see any support from the South Sudan government and from the people of South Sudan, even though they are there, their voices out there, but it's not strong. We don't have a strong voice to stand with people of Abyei. So what is the reason why the government of South Sudan so unelected when it comes to the issues of Abyei? What held them back? Why they don't speak the strong tone so that they will clear the people of northern government and the national community that Abyei is belong to South Sudan. People of Abyei are South Sudanese. So the future of Abyei, how can you see the future of Abyei from now? Do you think Abyei will be independent country? If there's no support, you see, as a side north on the south, will they be the only stand their own? They will have their own government, control themselves. Is it there will be an option or referendum? And we know that a few years ago, Abyei they vote a referendum and they reject both sides, both countries they rejected it. You see, and they vote overwhelmingly to be a part of South Sudan. So has the South Sudanese people, what can we do to pressure the South Sudan government to speak loudly so that the people of Abyei can be given the right they deserve? Because that people are dying. Misseriya killing them every day, every night. And the Misseriya are getting support from the northern government. And the people of Abyei don't get any support from Southern Sudan government. Why can the people of Abyei be a victim like this? Why the government of South Sudan don't reach out? Is it because the issue that government of South Sudan have a civil war that started in 2013 and they're still in crisis? And the current government is a joint government? Is it the reason why they neglect the people of Abyei? So these issues we have as a South Sudanese, we need to send out a strong message to the government of South Sudan so that they can do something. People out there are dying. Misseriya are killing them every day. And that's not good. So go ahead, I will hear my question back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, my main point of why we are not so much committed in taking civic responsibility to protect Abyei is simply because our civic orientation around Abyei is limited. And actually, I would say it's not there because of the top leadership in the country does not take Abyei as a national issue, as a national priority. And that has made us not to really take Abyei as something of civic obligation for every South Sudanese where he or she have to stand up for protection of Abyei. So the absence of civic orientation and civic knowledge from the political leadership of the country. And we always, whenever there's a crisis in Abyei, we don't hear it in terms of the sentiments or statements of leaders, and they take it serious so that children can get oriented that Abyei is our land. And even some of us who are intellectuals can get influenced by the position of the leadership of our country with regard to the status of Abyei. So the absence of civic commitment and civic education among South Sudanese have contributed for South Sudanese to see Abyei. And I'll tell you, there are people in this country, in far ends of the country, which have never heard about Abyei. If you ask them to say Abyei are Arabs, simply because they're not oriented, they're not educated. So for me, that's what something that is really a gap that South Sudanese leadership have to take responsibility in orienting and educating South Sudanese to understand Abyei is a national issue, because we don't have national orientation towards Abyei. And normal national orientation take a quick shape when the leadership of the country prioritize an issue. Look at Pantau. When there was issue in Pantau, look at the mobilization of South Sudanese going to Pantau, simply because by then there was a top national leadership commitment that whatever the price is, Pantau is our land and we must shut down the oil. It has happened. And people have mobilized from far end because there's a top national leadership commitment in pushing issues. And normally, if you want to mobilize public, it's the leadership of the country by putting this particular issue as a national priority. That's what is missing. And that's what I'm saying. When I was checking our MPs, some of our MPs make me disappointed in the way they speak as if they're only MPs for their community, not MPs for South Sudan. When you're in the parliament, you don't look yourself from a tribe or your state or your ethnic. You look at the angle, the big picture is a national. And that's, for me, even within the parliament, the orientation of taking Abyei seriously is not there. And that's why when I was asking them, can you call the traditional leaders to come to the parliament and brief you? And behind my mind, or the rationale behind my call or my ask, is simply because Abyei is a national issue. It's not an issue of Ngok Dinka. So it is the failure of the leadership in Juba not taking Abyei as a national issue that has made citizens to be reluctant in tackling Abyei. That's one thing I'd like to say. And one thing that I tell you, that by the situation we're in now, Khartoum is more powerful than us in terms of pushing back, because we depend too much on them. Besides, we have an opportunity of hosting a peace talks. We could have actually used that to pursue Abyei issue and to bring really mutual benefits. And we need to continue engaging the leadership in Khartoum. And by then we say it was a radical system of Bashir that antagonized the resolution of Abyei protocol implementation. But now if we have a new regime that is but more softer and much more easy, we could have engaged them. But because we don't have a commitment in Juba by having a task force that political is assigned to follow the case of Abyei and to lobby for the case of Abyei, that is missing. We only know Abyei when Dinka Ngok is attacked. If Dinka Ngok are not attacked, the name Abyei will disappear from our lips. We don't pronounce it. It's when a situation like this comes in that we pronounce Abyei. But without this, we don't really pronounce Abyei in other events. So for me, that's the nightmare. That's the problem. That's one thing to say. Future of Abyei. Future of Abyei. Abyei may end up as like Kashmir. May become a battlefield between the Misseriya and the Ngok Dinka, and may end up as a battlefield between South Sudan and Sudan. This is my main worry about the future of Abyei. One of the pressing points that I really want to call the leadership of Juba, and specifically with due respect and honor, I will call our President's Excellency Salva Kiir, there's a need for South Sudanese parliament to reconsider the referendum of Abyei. I know it is being disputed by the top leaders of the country, because international, there's a pressure that that particular referendum that was conducted in Abyei was unilateral. Okay, what is unilateral? It is unilateral if we could have several documents that are legally binding that say Misseriya have the right to vote. But all the proposals we have, with the last is the Mbeki one, says it is a permanent residence of Ngok Dinka. So if the permanent residents of Ngok Dinka were able to vote and decided, why should we use that as a pressure point to buy attention and to buy compromise from the opponent that is rejecting the status of it to be defined? It's simply because we don't use that. And because also they push that to a corner to acknowledge that that's unilateral. But you need to have a bargaining opportunity. Want to bargain opportunity, you can say, okay, since legally it is the permanent residence of Ngok Dinka, they have decided to exercise it. You fail to observe it, you fail to come and to attend to observe, but they have decided that's your vote. So let's negotiate. That could have been an opportunity. So the future of Abyei for me, the bargaining power is for us to recognize the outcome of the referendum, which some of us in Juba described as unilateral. We should use that as a bargaining power to buy the attention of the opponent. I tell you, if today our parliament have a meeting and call for that referendum to be endorsed, you will see how much attention Abyei case will be brought to the table and how much chances of compromises Misseriya will have if we're to go for that. And of course, we are in the modern world. Sometimes you need to show muscles in such situations in order to have a room of genuine table discussions. And when we saw muscles on Pantau, look at the way how we've been pushed back and how much international attention. So for me, it is a political leadership issue that they need to mobilize the masses to take Abyei as a national issue. And we can't make Abyei as a national issue among various sons and daughters of South Sudan until we have a proper national orientation, what Abyei is and what does Abyei mean to every single South Sudanese, wherever he or she is. That's very important. That absence of civic orientation around Abyei has made some of us see Abyei as a headache, as a disturbing case, as a case that even less allow them to go to Sudan, while simply the territory, the land is not Sudanese land, it's a South Sudanese land. So for me, that's the complete, and even our political establishment in the country. One of the things I'm trying to read manifestos of so many political parties and some of the basic documents, political parties. Abyei is not really a big issue in their documents. There's no single part that say, actually, one of my main objectives is to mobilize the mass of South Sudan to make sure that Abyei is decided to be a South Sudanese land. You don't see for any political party. So if the political establishment in the country does not prioritize Abyei as a national issue, then who are the people who are supposed to mobilize the masses politically to believe on Abyei as a national issue? So we have a big political weaknesses that has made our opponent to put on us pressure on always we have to talk to each other about Abyei. It's a high-time political establishment, have to prioritize it and have to use it as an agenda, have to use it as a slogan of mobilizing the masses. Politically, we can disagree about access to power, whether access to the power of presidency or governor, but the identity and the territorial control of Abyei is something that unites us. How much politically we disagree, but once come to agenda of Abyei, we should be united. That's one thing that should unite us, regardless of our political differences. But because our political establishment in the country even are weaker in their documents to take issue like Abyei as a national issue, and even the territorial protection of the territory of South Sudan in some political parties, manifestos and documents, is not there. So that's the big gap that we need to take responsibility and start changing our way of doing business with regard of territorial protection of the land of South Sudan. Look at how we're losing Lome Triangle. Nobody talks about it. And Kenya start redesigning the map. Nobody question like Kenya, no, this is not the original map. That's the original map we know about Kenya. It's only some few people in social media that are taking up that, simply because our political establishment does not care about that. They care about sitting on the chair. They lose a chair today, they rebel tomorrow. Next morning, they rebel, they sign an agreement, they come back and they own the chair. So the chair is a priority of political engagement in the country rather than really the big national issues like the territorial control of Abyei or territorial protection of South Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yakini, for answering my question. I will yield microphone back to you, Ngok.
Thank you, Abramadit. And thank you to our viewers and our listeners on Clubhouse and on Facebook, and even those who are on YouTube. To my brother Yakani, we really need to know, considering all these factors, power struggling, and also money gatherers, because many people now in our government prestastros or our government offices, the only thing they are looking at is how to reach themselves, to be honest. Once you are ascended to the political positions, you will even forget your agenda the day of your inauguration. And that is what is happening. Considering all this, one can tend to be pessimistic that Abyei future is uncertain. And that is, we will see what will happen. Whether political class will have interest in reviving Abyei protocol and even Kadukuli declarations and all other numerous documents in regard to the Abyei situation. Yeah, beside that, we will wrap up our interview of today or conversation of today with the recent incident that happened in Eastern Equatoria in Mugali. That is in Mugui County between cattle herders and the local people. We know that the two communities agree on some resolutions, and one of those resolutions that stand out was the repatriations of these cattle herders to their localities or to Jonglei State. Government spoke about it, and you activists spoke about that. Kindly, can you brief us, especially our viewers, have these resolutions being implemented, or they have been treated like the previous orders which were given by the government?
Okay, so should I go ahead?
Go ahead, my brother.
Yeah, of course, there are about 5 resolutions, and I think I will not waste time to talk to 5 of them. I'll pick to one of the resolution, which is number 1. And the one resolution was that there was a call for eviction of the cattle herders or movement of the cattle herders to return to their home of origin. That means the cattle herders have to leave the parts of Eastern Equatoria, and specifically that triangle of what do you call Madi actually corridor, Magui in general, and Juba Nimule Road. There's a call like they should return. With this particular resolution, what is going on, as I'm speaking with you now? One, there's a movement of cattle out of those land of Acholi and Madi. Most of them are now in northern part of Juba, and they're on their way to Bor. And of course, most of them stand there that they need safety and protection. And 2 days ago, the governor of Central Equatorial State have went to the military and addressed the military to be ready to provide safety and security for the cattle herders of Bor who are coming from Eastern Equatoria on their way to Jongole. And of course, the fear there is that it is our brothers who are coming from Greater Pibor, whether they'll come and raid or not. So the effort is not going speedily, but at least there's a promising movement that is going on. But one of the things that I like to make it clear that one of the things we're campaigning is that there's a need also to have a top leadership meeting. The leaders of Eastern Equatoria, Central Equatoria, Jongole, and Pibor, how to coordinate safety of the return of the cattle herders back to their hometown of Bor, because that's a priority. And that's the only way you can de-escalate violence there, because the violence is taking a very bad shape. We are now reached to the level of revenge attack using targeted killings. You have had a doctor who was actually working for 21 years with the IDPs, and specifically some of the IDPs are real, to be honest with you, are IDPs from our Jongole state. And I spoke to some few IDPs who feel sorry that this is a doctor that have saved them when they were IDPs when they are out of Jongole. Now his life is taken in simple way that he's been slaughtered. And most of the Dinkabor community were really sorry to see that what that happened. And that for me, it is a radicalization of the relationship that is happening. So for me, the movement is going, it's not speedy, but still we need to have a strong follow-up. That's what I think that I can update the audience that the first results about the eviction is taking place. But obviously, these need a proper, close monitoring and help in a way that if the cattle herders are going, they're not attacked. And also if they're going, they're not committing atrocities when they're to the host community, the host community will attack them. And that requires the role of the state. And wherever they are going, they should be escorted. Because also, as I usually used to say, they may meet criminal-minded other cattle raiders on their way back home, and they may be raided, and they may become another anti-kinetic situation or a violent situation. So that return is there. But of course, we need more of a commitment around safety and protection of both host community and cattle herders. That resolution is going on. And the security has been mobilized. As I said, 2 days ago, the governor of Central Equatorial State was in Mogri, the military base of South Sudan Defense Force in Mogri, and he's briefing them, be ready to help our citizens to go back to Jongole and make sure they are not raided by any, because the raiders, we can't really conclude that they are only from people administrative areas. Even within the Bor community, there are criminal individuals who are raiding themselves, who are raiding cattle of their own fellow. And we have some people maybe from the criminals from other parts of the country. Maybe we have different cattle keeping communities along this road, and some of them who may be criminal minded may attempt raid. And that's why the presence of the state in providing security and safety is very important, because at least now there's a water for the cattle herders to go back, because on their way they can meet waters that can help. And there's also grass that are coming out the cattle can feed on their way, because it's no longer dry like previously. So that's what I like to say that need to be and to give attention. But one thing that I'd like to take opportunity here, brothers and sisters that are listening to me, the level of hostile propaganda and hate speech being amplified, it is too bad. We have reached to the level of describing ourselves, some of us are foreigners. They deserve to be wiped out. That's completely is an attitude that for me is an extreme position that I'd like to hear from the South Sudanese. And unfortunately, intellectuals are doing that. It have reached to the level of leaders are issuing statements that are actually challenging identity of being South Sudanese. That's really disturbing. And most of us are also the educated class, creating letters, writing letters that sometimes it beat the mind of why we decided to become an independent state. And I know these are minority. I know they're not majority. They're minority, and the minority won't spoil. But I'd like to say whoever feels that he or she want to use hostile propaganda and hate speech as a way of winning the agenda, that's wrong. That's completely a wrong way of doing things. That's completely wrong attitude. You are deciding to destroy the state of South Sudan. So whatever the case is, the appeal I would like to make to every South Sudanese, whether you are from the community of Eastern Equatoria, or you are from the community of Jongole or other communities, or you want to conclude yourself as an identity, there, please, I'm asking you, abstain from hostile propaganda, abstain from hate speech, abstain from writing documents that may conclude for us to lose the social fabric that bring us together. That's one thing that I'd like to take this opportunity before I could conclude, that I'm urging South Sudanese, please, please, please abstain from hate speech and hostile propaganda and leveling, because the people who start leveling others completely. And this is trading so much in the social media. And my fear is that we are radicalizing the generations that will take over this country from us. We are building a very bad generation, and are building a very bad presidency for our sons and daughters to coexist as South Sudanese. We're pushing them so much to think about a tribe and ethnicity more than South Sudan. And we should not contribute in splitting up the generations to come. And this call goes to the intellectuals, whom we describe them as elites of South Sudanese from these various communities, because I've seen a disturbing letters coming out from people who we describe as intellectuals, and that's really disturbing so much. And one of the things that I feel it become a curse is those of us who claim we have gone to school as South Sudanese. We become a curse for our nation in terms of peace and stability, with our write-ups, with our amplification of hate speech and hostile propaganda, that we start leveling others to be like they're not South Sudanese. That is a bad practice. We must all face the challenge in front of us with the mutual benefit. And the mutual benefit is that having a peaceful state of South Sudan, and where we coexist without any form of discrimination. That's the call I would like to make, that please abstain, abstain, abstain from hostile propaganda and hate speech. That is not an answer to your quest. The answer to your quest is less dialogue and less respect the rule of law, less respect the norms and rights will exist in a better nation. That one day will be seen as one of the greatest nations. But hate speech and hostile propaganda is breaking the country into pieces. Thank you. Over there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brother Edmund Yakani. On behalf of Lagos State Media, we condemned the killing of a doctor, which happened in Eastern part, especially in Numili. There are some kind of individuals, people should not mess up with their lives in any society, despite any circumstances. The like of doctor, the children, the women, the teachers, and even the leaders, because there are leaders who normally being transferred from the land of origin to another territory to go and provide leadership. But these people should always be examined, no matter how devastated the situation is. But now, this is not the first time I heard or hear the doctor being killed. Several happened, especially in Upper Nile region, for the last few years, and it's still happening up to now. So it's better for our government to stand up and start talking to our people, because doctors are not into these issues of which community hate which community. These are people with the special skills that provide services and rescue human life. And if you kill doctor or a doctor, it's like you are taking away your own lives and the lives of other people who are sick. So it's very sad, my brother. It's really indeed sad things to hear that news. And our government need to stand up and start condemning this thing at the strongest time possible, so that our people get to differentiate the conflict and the future of where you belong. With these few remarks and our conversations, I can still say thank you so much, Yakani, for always be there for us. And we will look forward to invite you for more conversation and for more talk. Our people need civic education, and it is your responsibility as activists and civil society to engage our civil population on such matters. Let them know, and let them also refrain themselves from political affiliation. Politicians, all of them, they have seen them. Politicians, none of the politicians have or has ever put the interest of the community as a priority. Their interest is always their position, and community become a tool they use to ascend themselves to their political seat. And there are no shortage of such examples in our country as per now. So South Sudanese, we really need to open our eyes, and we really need to embrace ourselves as one people before politicians used us adequately, and they're using us as per now. Thank you so much. I will yield it back to my co-host, Abraham Adit, to make his last remark, and then we will end the show. Thank you so much, and may God bless you. May God bless our country.
Thank you, brother Mjok and brother Yukin.
Can I come in for a minute or?
Yeah, we will give you a last minute. Yeah. So yeah, come.
Yeah, because when I asked Brother Abraham about the resolution of Magui incident, it was very important because Mr. Yakini told us last time that he was going to come back. He's going to be in the meeting and he's going to come back with the outcome of the meeting. So, and that's why I was asking. It's good to know why you have seen Brother Abraham and everybody else here in the room. The reaction of people in the diaspora from the resolution of this meeting. Now, there was different and radical reaction from a few people who call themselves Equatorian. We don't consider it as a whole Equatorian. There's a media they were celebrating. They said, you see, we told you if you are armed and you could kill as much as you can from these thinkers, that you become violent against them, they will leave Equatoria. You see, they are leaving now. And not that only. We're not going to let all of us leave Equatoria. We have young people across the Equatorial region, where they are passing, going back to Jungle State. They said they had people there waiting for this country to keep us. When they pass by, they will kill them. You see the extent these people went. And then there's another media was saying, you know what? They brought in two different groups. I'm not going to say their names, from two different tribes along the region of Eastern Equatoria. They were celebrating and they were saying, we're going to be following these cows and we will continue attacking and raiding and all of that. They were celebrating and they were playing their local songs. You see how work this guy. And the third thing I told you last time, there's people that were saying they're going to have a meeting to form something called Equatorian Forces. There's a post today saying that they are celebrating. They say, well, they already started, putting up the forces forming formation of the world.
Abraham, your network is breaking down. Abraham, your network is breaking down. We cannot hear you.
The matter. Now, this is the inside of what's happening, reactions happening regarding, the situation of the map with the Abyei. The left side of the things have got out of hand completely. They say we are in war. We are forming Equatorian force, Dinka. They are not even part of South Sudan. They are invaded, and all these kind of things. Now, when it comes to dialogue or negotiation or just discussing in the rooms like we're doing now as a national or people of the one nation, we don't have a constructive discussion. It's all tribalism, insult, disrespect. So my question is, what people are saying in the social media, is it seen in the ground? Because they're celebrating, they say, these people, they did that, we talk to this group, and this group, they're going to do that. Is it seen in the region of Equatoria, the things that people are talking about in the region? If that's the case, they are seen and it's felt. What is the response of you, somebody from the ground, as accredited civil society activist, as an activist, number one, and number two, as a citizen of South Sudan? How do you view this behavior?
Okay, thank you, Abraham. Yeah, brother, here you go ahead.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to say to Abraham is that what he raised is something that we have seen from both sides. We have seen those which he described as the letters who say Dinkas are invaders. We have seen those which written describing Equatorians as Ugandans, as not people who are original citizens of South Sudan, all those letters. And that's what I'm calling as hate speech and hostile propaganda, that I'm all asking people who feel national should abstain themselves from that, because this exchange of letters is not healthy for securing our national identity. So I don't think that here we need to blame one side. All sides are engaged so much in that. And it is social media being used for promoting that. And social media, you can't really blame diaspora as a general. But I think the people who are outside South Sudan, who promotes that so much for their benefit, simply because this is built on one exercise. So personally, I'm somebody who I condemn those descriptions. I don't condone them. I don't embrace them, because they make us lose identity. And we have seen letters that come with several headings that either is attack on Dinka or is an attack on Equatorians as a whole. And while Equatoria is not a tribe. So that's one thing that I'd like to say with my brother Abraham, that I don't embrace that and I don't entertain that, and that we need to stop it. That's one thing I like to make it very clear. Allegations of forces or whatever, I've never seen. What I've seen is that there's a tension mounting among the host communities and the pastoralists. And of course, that is mainly a question of proper governance. When you have a proper governance, you could have not have those merging tensions, because as we said, like the way how some people take the interpretation of the slaughtering a medical doctor, that's painful, and that may take to revenge, or maybe reading it may take to revenge. So for me, the whole responsibility goes to people, that if we can respect each other, the way you want to be respected should be the way you respect me. The way how you want me to live should be the way you want us to live. That's the best solution. So the tension we have is that when the cattle herders comes to the community, and this is something I'd like to make it very clear and straightforward, is that there's nobody that in the region of Equatoria is hating a Dinka. The practice that is being tension is a friction of a competition of. Yes, the use of the land is the biggest problem. Oh, sorry, I muted myself. I think I need to go back to and I start answering from the beginning. So sorry, I was focusing on that. So now let's say to my brother Abraham is that these letters have been exchanged from one side to another. There are those who say Dinkas are invaders. There are those who say Equatorians are not South Sudanese, they are from Uganda, which is something that we need to make it very clear is that there are people who are exchanging those letters. So if those letters are bitter, all of us need to stop it, because it does not benefit anybody. Those letters, none of us benefit out of those letters by antagonizing and amplifying. The celebrations we have also is no longer healthy. And of course, besides the celebration, there's a mobilization going on. You can see also that mobilization is going on. One group say we're going to revenge, we're going to kill them, let's deal with them in individual way. Even some people are saying the way how the doctor is killed is already a revenge, is a slaughtering. Those are the interpretations that are going on in social media. And that's what I concluded for myself, that we're losing the national identity. So the call is that everybody should abstain, being a Dinka or Equatorian, should abstain from that particular trend, so that we have a genuine ground of a dialogue of seeing what's the best way forward. That's one. Two, we need to really see how do we coexist, because you have seen some people making sentiments that those who eat under the tree, we don't need to give them the chance to continue. And those are all hate speeches that I've been talking around. There's a quite number of hate speeches, and some of them are coming from reliable sources of leaders that you don't respect them to make those statements. So I like to call that off. That is something not of my mutual, or it's not something of my real interest that I would like to much more, because I see it's a confusion of few elites that want to use attitudes of rule and divide, bully attitude. That can't work in the South Sudan that we're in now. Bullying, divide and rule, it will never help us anymore. And everybody knows the games behind these theories. Whenever you want to use bullying and then you want to use divide and rule principle, all of us are now educated. We know the consequence of that, and we know how to do that. Also, resistance will be not a final option. And specifically, there's this saying that when there's no justice, resistance become an option. So we need to really make sure justice prevails, so that resistance is taken as an option of calling for justice. Those are the things that I'd like to make it very clear to you. In terms of the mobilization of forces, I have to be honest, I'm on the ground. I don't think really we need to really conclude that the Equatorians are mobilizing against the Dinkas. What for me I know clearly is happening is that the influx of huge number of cattle, because it's disturbing farming. And where are we farming? We're farming in that small land, which I call it always a protected land. We can't go to the villages, we have vast land, but we can't go anywhere because those lands, in terms of safety and security, is a problem. So we have a small land within this big chunk of land that human can use for human use, and we're competing over it with the pastoralists. So it's a question of, we need to really understand that the host community are not hostile because they hate their brothers pastoralists. It's simply because saying, give us chance to farm and let us. And of course, some of them are isolated incidents, but because there's no justice, it become a bit problematic. So for me, that's the message I want to convey. If you ask me still, I will repeat my message, that whatever we're doing, write-ups, sentiments we're issuing, some of them constitute hate and hostile propaganda. And that's why I'd like to call for everybody to abstain from hate and hostile propaganda, and we must ensure rule of law prevailed. Once rule of law prevailed, all these things can bring to an end. But of course, the call we are calling for is that peace and stability is our priority. But we cannot have peace and stability if we want to demonstrate bully, if we want to demonstrate rule and divide, and if we want to demonstrate the rule of leveling others, that they are not this and this or that. Those particular leveling, we need to stop it, and those attitudes, we need to stop it. We will have the South Sudan. We won. But all I'd like to say is that at least there's a positive development in diffusing and de-escalating the crisis between the pastoralists and the farmers in Eastern Equatoria, but still there are now isolated incidents which we can describe them as a targeted killings, which we're calling it should be stopped because that may escalate violence again, and we don't want to see an escalation of violence because we are tired of violence among our communities. And we must respect what we think describe what we call a better peaceful coexistence principle among the communities. Thank you over there.
So last question, is that okay, Abraham?
Okay, yeah, 2 minutes or 1 minute, yeah. So we are about to wrap it up.
Yeah. So now, Mr. Yakani, do you have, because there is two accounts that
you are there.
Stay in
yes.
And
can you repeat, Abraham? Can you repeat your word again? Your network break it out.
Huh?
Can you repeat your word again? Your network is breaking up. Yes, now we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Yes. There is a rumor saying that these cattle headers are going to stay in Mangala, and there is another rumor says they are going to Western and the place called Raja. Where are they exactly going? Are they going to Raj? They're going to, they're still going to stay within the Equatoria, or confirm they're going to Malaysia?
Thank you. Okay,
So should I
go ahead.
Yeah, I think what I know, to the best of my knowledge, the cattle herders are heading back to Bor. And there was this argument around the floods, that floods is really affecting the communities in Bor. How are they going to go there? And the concept of Raja came, I think, in one of our interview of one of our leader, our former Minister of Defense, Kwal Manyang, was using, describing Raja as normal land, that actually people can migrate to Raja because it's a normal land. And I don't know if you've been following closely the social media, the Western Baragazal community and specific Raja have to issue a statement of condemning our former Minister of Defense, that by describing Raja as a normal land, they say, what do they mean by normal land? We're here, we're the indigenous, a land will look like empty, but the moment you touch about it, immediately somebody jump up and say, that's my land. And of course, the truth is that there's normal land in this country. Every land have its owner, though if the owner is not occupying it. So for me, I think they're going to Bor. The discussion now, which we need to pick up, is actually also the national government have to take, is that how do we handle the floods? So we shouldn't use that as an excuse of allowing tension to merge between farmers and pastoralists. So they're now in Mangala. I don't think that they're going to really live in Mangala. As I'm telling you, when I follow up the governor of Central Equatoria, he went to Mugri. He told the forces these cattle have to be escorted to Bor and make sure that they go safe and make sure that they handle it. That's what I like to bring to attention. So I think the reality is that we must think about what is the mutual benefit. How do we handle that? That's what I like to tell every South Sudanese, that that's where we can find a solution, that we can coexist, like during the days of the struggle, when we're struggling for the independence of South Sudan, where we move from one country to another to struggle and to get the South Sudan that we want, where we don't blame that one or X, Z is the more dominant contributors for independence. All of us have contributed in different ways, whether being in country, and even like people like you, diaspora, your voices count a lot in amplifying the situation we're in. That's counted also as a contribution. Not that all you can say, because you're outside, you're not contributing. No, where whoever, even those who have gone to school, their education by itself is a contribution for our liberation, because today there are civil servants that are implementing or driving the service delivery. So for me, those are the messages I like to say, that I don't think there's an agenda that they should go to Raja. It's a proposal of an individual, and I think that proposal, it reminds me of one situation, just to conclude with. I remember when the president was addressing the nation in the recent tension in Juba town, and one journalist asked the president, have you declared a war? Because by then the spokesperson of SSPDF have declared a war against AU. Then the president said, no, that is personal statement. As a commander-in-chief, I've never declared a war. It becomes a shame. Sometimes we have individuals who make the individualistic statement that couldn't be concluded. But of course, some people run away with that statement as a strategy already. And specifically, when such individuals cannot come back and apologize, say, okay, if my statement is wrong, I withdraw it. And that's why, it have extended the tension from being only between farmers and pastoralists in Magui. It have brought now Raja community, where they are very far. They have to issue a statement to condemn an interview related to this escalation of violence in Mogale and Nimule. So I like to say, my final call, abstain from hostile propaganda and hate speech. The South Sudan we want, we will get it.
Thank you so much.
So that's not a solution. If you evicted them to nowhere, government's supposed to be specific.
I'm not getting him. Is it asking still?
Sorry, I did myself.
But now, if you evict these people to anywhere within the Equator or any other people's land, that's a new problem. It's supposed to be a solid solution, or it's going to this specific place. Like that, you have solved the problem. Now it looks like they have started a new problem. It's going to be in Western Baragazal. And that's why I was asking you exactly what was the resolution. What I was expecting, the answer I was expecting, besides being evicted, is supposed to be there wherein that these cattle keepers are been evicted to go to this specific place, and these are the mechanism for enforcing this decision. You see,
Can I? Abraham.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to talk to Abraham. I don't think that they're evicted to nowhere. one of the things that we need to put into that Jonglei is not completely flooded. The floods have reduced. Dikes have been built. Okay. I know there's a what they call Eastern fever disease, specifically in Bortown and around the river, is killing the animals. And that's just some of the things that we've been discussing. It. What do we get as a solution to respond? Because also if they return, the livestock is a national wealth. And that's why some of us are also looking into what can we create as a conducive environment if our brothers and sisters, cattle herders from Bor is returning back to Bor. And that's why now there's a discussion of let us mobilize veterinary services, let us try to talk. And I remember I attended one of the meetings where we're really discussing issue of veterinary services respond for them and even vaccination of the cattle on their way, because also it's not that only it is in Bortown, actually it's along the river. And that means even Equatoria, you have the Eastern coast fever, but you need to vaccinate. So I think we need to be a bit sober and genuine in our minds so that we don't push for things that we can find a solution to it. That's the call I like to say. And I like to say to my brother Abraham is that it's not only that he's concerned, even those of us who are not cattle herders, we're concerned about the way how we need to protect the livestock, because that's our economy. That's not an economy of herders in Dinka alone. That's something of a national gain. That's what some of us are discussing. What do we do as they're returning back with regard to vaccination? And I was in Bor myself. I went to the ground to understand the situation and came back and mobilized quite a number of NGOs that are working on vaccination, like UNISFA, like there's a VSF, which is a German vaccination, so that at least we also provide solution, because you don't push me to a corner that there's no any option for my safety and my protection and my livelihood. So some of the discussion that we're taking, and this is what I'd like to communicate to my fellow colleagues who are in the diaspora, is that as much as you get information, sometimes as said, I like this approach where you cross-check with some of us who are on the ground, who are also putting energy to ensure that our brothers and sisters who are cattle herders are not put on harm, because our interest is that also they are human beings like us. What about if we turn ourselves to be like them and they have to be like us? How do you treat ourselves? That's sometimes I like to call colleagues in the social media that give yourself time to see energy and efforts that some people are putting to respond to this situation in a very holistic manner. So I don't think we're taking them nowhere, and I don't think that they've been evicted to just on empty one. No. Options have been weighing on the ground, and some people like me, I have to confess, I speak to myself, I don't the rest, but I know that quite a number of people beyond me, who are big in number, that are looking for options, of better options for our brothers and sisters from Bor in terms of their return, a sustainability of the safety and the life of their cattle in terms of livestock, because sometimes violence comes, but also violence opens people's eyes to look for other better option solutions to a better situation. So thank you over there.
Repeat your question, okay? Abraham, repeat your question again. What did you say?
I'm saying, so these cattle herders, they are going straight to Jonglei State, to Bor. They are not going to Mangala. They are not going to Raja, is it?
Yes, of course. Yes. And by the way, one of the things that I would like to bring for some people who may take the statement of our Minister of Defense as a strategy is that we are expanding the scale of radicalizing South Sudanese. And as I said, you can see the statement from the community of Raja. And that for me also may put our brothers and sisters from Heather's community who may be around that area to be targeted at communicating while they have nothing to do with this. And that sometimes I like to ask that, let us remain calm, let us begin. And I like the way how Abraham is investigating. That's facts for the best concerns of the people. So they're going to Jonglei, that's a strategy, and they've been helped how to go to Jonglei and how to remain in a safe site that don't expose them. That's it. So there's no strategy that they're going to be taken to Raja and they're staying in Mangala. I know there's IDPs of the floods in Mangala, but those IDPs are not cattle herders. They came, they have their cattle, they have their way of how to live. So the idea is that the plan is how do we make a conducive environment in Jonglei during the reception of these cattle herders. And that's what I'm saying. Some of us are working harder to make sure that we provide also solution to these particular challenges facing them. Thank you over there.
Thank you. So we come to an end. Thank you, Abraham and Brother Yakani and Majok. This is a wonderful discussion. Our next show, we will be talking about the issues of Twitch and Abyei. and Dinka Ngok. So this is the conflict between Twitch and Dinka Ngok. So we will be that will be our next show. We are reading the documents that we received. So after we read everything, then we will do the next show. So Majuk, if you have a last word, you can go ahead and then I'll close the show.
Yeah, not at all. You can proceed.
Okay, thank you. Those who watching in YouTube, Facebook, and Clubhouse, thanks so much for being a part of this program. Let us, the more we talk, bring the reliable information to the public. People can know exactly what's going on. That's a good thing. Thank you so much, Brother Yakani, for coming in. We will see you next time for the next discussion. Have a wonderful night. I know it's late over there in Juba. Thank you. Have a good night.
It's your boy Young Love. I give him that thing. Pancho leg stand and punchy America. Panji door the banaban. Pancho leg stand and punchy America. Panji door the banaban. Walk on your leg. Kankaro what on a watching. Koga level leg. Gear bow. Better leg. Panda with ya. Punchy America. Panya Dwalavan. Chingatongo Pandon. Could you ever buy a check out? Paku Panda Giro. There be $1.20. Stand up Panchi America, Panji Dwal, Banaban Pantaleg stand up Panchi America, Panji Dwal, Banaban walk on the lake, Kankaro what on a watching, Koga level leg, Gear bow, where I leg, Panda with ya, Panchi America, Panya Dwalavan, Chingatongo Pandon, could you ever buy a check out, Paku Panda Giro, what ya be $1.20.